wars should be discussed tri-service-wise and not single-service-wise. Battlefields can be discussed in single services, but when it comes to war, it must be a tri-service effort. And if we can get hold of the civilian personalities from the politics as well as from the other services, particularly foreign service, it will probably make even more constructive discussion and something worthwhile. I find that 1965 war has been described in many manners. Many people have talked about it as India's forgotten war. Obviously, we are remembering it after 50 years and trying to commemorate now. It has been, it's not wrong to call it a forgotten war. And I think more than partly it is because we have apathy towards the profession of soldiering in India. That's my general feeling. A lot of people have called it stalemated war. Again, I'm not too sure whether that is correct. I think this is because this war has not been, people have not been made aware of this war. But that is, again, because there was lack of awareness of it. And there is one journalist who's not very popular these days with the military, and he calls it war of mutual incompetence. Again, I think he was cutting his journalistic teeth during '65 war only, and maybe some prejudiced mind. But again, I think I can blame it for lack of awareness. And there is one more who just recently wrote, a war that was needed to test India's nationhood. I think both the Honorable Defense Minister and Honorable Vice President both referred to it, and they talked about the nationhood part of this war. India came out with flying colors, both on and off the field. That's where the whole country got together, and the kind of support they gave to our military men fighting on the western border. That, I think, was the first thing that happened, first time it happened in that manner, and then, of course, we continued after that into every war. Now, the fact is that the wars and myths often go together, and that is why I believe that writing and narrating and discussing wars is important for the real military history to come out and to be of some use to the generations that follow. I'm a realist, less of an idealist when it comes to international relations. And I feel that this was probably the ideal time that Pakistan could have done something on Kashmir. They lost that opportunity. I'm saying that that was the ideal time because look at the circumstances that were there at that time. We were still recovering from the ignominy of the 1962 war. My own battalion, which had been in Ladakh from 62 to 64, and we had come out, we were in Ramgarh. I was part of the battalion as a captain, and we were still carrying out exercises, trying to absorb a bit of equipment that we had received from outside. And nobody was even thinking of, we were just exercises and exercises that was going on. And that was so everywhere else also. We were in the midst of expanding the army, giving it a facelift. Pakistan, as compared to India, was stable, economically doing much better, which was being acknowledged by the international community. And Pakistan had also befriended China after 1963, when they ceded Shaksgam Valley to them. And Pakistan, as we all have heard again and again, was being equipped, being supported by the USA. And they had the latest of weapons and equipment, including aircraft, ships, and everything, while we were still struggling to get some new equipment. Well, that is why I am saying that those are the best circumstances, but unfortunately, Pakistan, as it always had, even afterwards, had a false sense of optimism and superiority. This is a common factor I find from 47 onwards till now. And they continue to suffer, not knowing how to end a war and whether it will end in their favor or not realizing the nationhood, India's nationhood. I'm not going to spend more time. We have excellent discussions coming up. On the political side, political diplomatic overview by Dr. Manoj Joshi, state of Indian military and relative strengths or weaknesses by Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain.
Veterans of the 65 conflict and members of this very august audience. As a rookie among the luminaries on this panel, I find myself slightly at odds addressing this most challenging subject, which actually sets the tone for the seminar. For me, analyzing a single theater or maybe a battle such as the Battle of Hajipir or something would have been a more perhaps an easier task. But this generous subject is loaded with so much ambiguity that finding any way, my way through it, has been a real challenge, and I'll try my best to address it. While addressing the subject, it is near impossible to take stock of the state of the military without really taking stock of the nation per se. Part of it has already been done by Dr. Manoj Joshi. But General Satish Nambiar, who's also in the audience today, came to my rescue with a brilliant expose in this very high-profile magazine called the Defense and Security Alert, to which I will be referring to his article very frequently. Even as some very outstanding analyses have flooded the internet in the last few days, if you notice, and that makes my job also much easier. So with time strictly at a premium, this is not the occasion to show any articulation skills, but pack in as much as I can in the 15 minutes that have been allotted to me, of which I have already consumed a minute and a half, and I assure you, Chairman, sir, I shall be very disciplined. As far as the general situation is concerned, in the broad period of 1963 to 1965, on the face of it, everything that could be wrong was wrong with India. We had lost miserably to the Chinese in 1962. In fact, we were humiliated. The proud Indian military, the legacy of the British Indian armed forces, was in a state of shock. Civil-military relations were at the lowest ebb. We had ambitious plans of re-equipping ourselves, which were just about fructifying. Equipment was still vintage, and while formations and units were being raised, the integration was nowhere near achievement. The order of battle, or the OBAT, as we are used to calling it, was still under discussion. In terms of personnel, there was heavy recruitment going on with reduced periods of training. Emergency commission for officers requiring just 3 months of pre-commission training. This was churning out hordes of second lieutenants who were completing their on-the-job training at regimental centers, awaiting induction into new raisings. Even the Defense Services Staff College course had been curtailed to just 6 months to have 2 courses per year. Without much of a media, the nation had probably not realized the enormity of military defeat. Attempts at infusing national confidence were essentially emotive. You had Lata Mangeshkar's very famous "Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo," sung shrilly with tears and choking throats, but that's about all. National stock-taking related to military security was yet at a distance. To beat it all, there were language riots in the south, and a looming food crisis had forced acceptance of the United States PL 480 food aid package, not something to raise national self-esteem. Kashmir had undergone a crisis involving the theft of the Prophet's single strand of hair from the Hazrat Bal in December 1963, and this whole crisis had been badly politicized. A mention of it was already made by Dr. Joshi. Internationally, the situation for India was at best tentative as compared to Pakistan's bold swagger, emerging from the SEATO and the CENTO alliances dating to the 50s. it had the audacity to illegally cede 5,000 square kilometers of the Shaksgam Valley to China in the vain hope of political and military support in a future contingency. Nehru died a broken man on the 27th of May 1964, and his replacement, Lal Bahadur Shastri, inspired at the beginning very little confidence internationally and especially among the Pakistanis. The Pakistan perception at this time, I think that what I have described in the last 3 minutes for you perhaps is exactly the way Ayub and Bhutto were perceiving India and its military on the basis of reports which were emanating from Pakistan's embassy at New Delhi. General Musa, the army chief, may have been providing them with a military, statistical, and organizational comparison, I'm sure, at that time, which may have read something like this. General Musa, perhaps in one of the briefings sometime around the month of February, March of 1965, must have been saying the following. Strength, well, India has got 850,000 people under arms, as far as the army is concerned. Pakistan has got 269,000. The infantry, India has 9 infantry and 11 mountain divisions, but deployable 35 brigades on the Western Front. Mostly on a reduced scale. For example, the headquarter 10 Infantry Division, raised in Bangalore, came into battle and was effective on the 1st of September, the day the Operation Grand Slam was launched. Pakistan had 7 divisions with 26 deployable brigades, their divisions having more brigades available with them. 260,000 light militia in terms of numbers, personnel, and not to forget the Mujahid units. The demand of a 21-division army, Indian army, was being futilely contested by the Ministry of Defense at that time. In terms of armor, India had 16 regiments with 720 tanks. Pakistan had 17 regiments with 765 tanks, the quality of the tanks that we'll talk about a little later. Armor formations. India had 1 armored division, the famous Black Elephant, 1 independent armored brigade, 5 independent squadrons, 2 armored divisions as far as Pakistan is concerned. The 6th armored division we were not even aware of. It had a single armored brigade. The artillery, India had 68 regiments with 76 millimeter, 25-pounder, and 5.5-inch medium guns for the 10 medium regiments. No 105 millimeter caliber had come in by that time. Pakistan had 44 regiments with sprinklings of 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter. The Air Force, India had 26 fighter squadrons with Hunters, Gnats, Mysteers, Vampires. Pakistan had 17 squadrons, which included the F-86, Sabre jets, F-104 starfighters, and the B-57 bombers. And detailed characteristics of these will no doubt be discussed in this seminar. A very brief comment on the ground forces. Infantry, the queen of the battle, was still acquiring and orientating to the 7.62 millimeter SLR and the 7.62 LMG. Units had 1 LMG per section, if you remember at that time. While Pakistan, that means 37 per unit, while Pakistan had already gone in for a reorganization of 72 per unit. The 81 millimeter mortar was in transition of induction, replacing the 3-inch. But the real force multiplier, as far as Pakistan was concerned, was the recce and support unit. It took a long time for the Indian Army to actually acquire a recce and support unit. If I'm not mistaken, it was way forward in 1982 or 83 it finally happened. Each such unit had 48 RCLs, 48 LMGs, and 24 medium machine guns. Each infantry unit already had 8 RCLs and 8 MMGs. So it gave a tremendous amount of flexibility to the formation commander in terms of anti-tank and anti-personnel capability. The holding of RCLs and MMGs in the Indian infantry was similarly authorized, but holding was absolutely low and jeep mounts were all deficient. In terms of the state of armor, the MBT of India was really the Centurion tank. 4 regiments existed of that. The rest of the regiments had AMX-13s, Shermans, and Stuarts, armored cars. Pakistan's armor out of the 765 tanks, it had 352, which were of the Patton variety. In terms of obstacle systems, the DCB, India looked at the DCB only post-1971. But Pakistan had already visualized the utility of a linear obstacle system to relieve troops and to create reserves. The Ichugil Canal was a defense-oriented system, irrigation system, but this aided the offensive defense concept. Intelligence. That really is a force multiplier, and I can see the DGMI is present here. It's a good thing that he must hear this. Little was heard of the Intelligence Bureau between 1962 and 1965. I don't find too much of it in any literature. Much of it is heard before 1962. Mr. B. and Malik and company and all the things which happened between the army and the IB at that time. Granted that equipment and technology were unavailable, but not to pick up straws in the wind about Gibraltar. Concentration of 7,000 to 8,000 supposedly mujahids, which would ultimately become a 30,000 strong force. Not to pick up straws in the wind about this. Not to pick up straws in the wind of the concentration of armor, 2 armored regiments worth, for Grand Slam opposite of Noor, were actually unforgivable. The reach actually was just not there. And strategic intelligence on Pakistan's intent was also very poorly read. As far as Pakistan's follies were concerned, I think it's best summed up under the very famous quotation of Bertolt Brecht. It says, and I quote, "Because things are the way they are, things will not stay the way they are." I'd say that again. Quoting, "Because things are the way they are, things will not stay the way they are." Unfortunately, the Pakistan leadership continued to view as if the Indian defensive system was in a state of paralysis, complete paralysis. Pakistan's reading of the available indicators was not off the mark. But in intelligence, one thing is very important. There's always something under the skin, which is read by hunches, gut feelings, and by sheer common sense. What didn't Pakistan read? What it did not read at all was that the Indian political leadership was listening much more to the military leadership. Later, the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi displayed that in 1971 also by taking the Field Marshal's advice. This was a sea change from the days of the pre-62 era. My ex-GOC in the 19th Infantry Division, General Raj Mehta, in a recent article, I think he has analyzed it extremely well, and I quote him when he says, "The steel-nerved Shastriji empowered the armed forces to plan for war, including taking proactive action, if push comes to shove. This positively affected the mojo of the armed forces and restored their self-belief, which reflected in the war that followed." This is an apt quote because it explains the basic intrinsic strength of the Indian armed forces. Shastriji and his defense minister, Mr. Y.B. Chavan, backed their military leaders, quite unlike Nehru's disdain for the military. In fact, Shastriji authorized the employment of the Indian Air Force at the most appropriate time. The Indian military was strong in basics. That generation, many of which are sitting here, was very poor in personal financial management, but rock solid in section, platoon, and tank troop leading tactics. This was the generation which taught many of us, the generals in this hall who are sitting here, commissioned in the 70s, were all taught by this generation which got experienced in 1965. I remember you. I can marvel at this generation's simplicity, discipline, and dedication. Many of you are sitting here among us from that generation, and I bow my head to you, sirs. The officer-man relationship was the core strength of the Indian Army, built around the regimental system, which was going great guns. And whatever equipment that was held, they had mastered and could innovate with it, unlike their Pakistani counterparts, who were yet struggling with Western equipment. It was strange that Ayub forgot the qualities of the Indian soldiers with whom he had served 19 years, 1928 to 1947. Musa's military mind had read the situation well, but Ayub and Bhutto were in a tearing hurry, fearing that a year more, beyond 1965, and the chances of victory against the refurbished Indian military would be much more remote. Was the information on the arrival of the half squadron of MiG-21s and possible arrival of T-54s and T-55 tanks in the future the actual indicator or the trigger which led to the conflict? That's a moot point. In the bargain, that what went wrong was actually on 2 points, 2 counts. From Pakistan's side, not preparing the ground in Kashmir for the projected Revolutionary Council. How could they imagine that the Kashmiris would support them without doing any groundwork on it at all? And being absolutely, perfectly, completely cocksure that Shastri just did not have it in him to fight across the international border. Even that contingency was hardly catered for. As far as Kashmir is concerned, it needs to be noted how weak the Indian Army was in Kashmir. Headquarters Western Command from Shimla took over, oversaw the entire operations with 15 corps at Udhampur. The valley was the charge of 19 infantry div, which was strung all along the ceasefire line. And in the depth, we had just 2 brigades. Counter-infiltration was something which was almost impossible along the Shamshabari or along the Pir Panjal. If the strength of Razakars had built up to the projected 30,000 that it was supposed to be, it would have been extremely difficult for us to respond. With 26th Infantry Division looking after the crucial corridor of the National Highway, and hardly any armor, and just a brigade in the Akhnur sector, with a battalion strung along the Munawar Tawi, with a weak squadron of armor, the Indian Army was surely taking its chances, especially with the raising of Pakistan's 6th Armored Div just across, of which we were all oblivious. Luck and incompetence of the Pakistan Army also largely contributed to Jammu and Akhnur remaining in our hands. Last 1 minute. On victory and defeat, not my call, but what's there in passing judgment on victory and defeat. On social media or otherwise, I continue to maintain that Pakistan celebrates 6 September as Defense of Pakistan Day, simply because it has no other event to celebrate. Unlike us, we have given them the liberty, it seems, to never mentioning 1965 among our military successes. When you prevent your enemy from achieving his devious aims, you can justifiably celebrate victory. And lastly, do you see a similarity between the situation today and that which existed in 1965 prior to the war? The same Pakistani cockiness and the same perception that India does not have to respond to trans-LOC incursions, that they have a nuclear umbrella to give them coverage. All this is still in the air. That is because, once again, it is their propaganda working on their people and maybe some of our people. What we need to do is to consciously ratchet up our psychological operations and perception management machinery, and this seminar may just be doing that. Let us never be shy of saying that we have adopted the proactive strategy as a doctrine, and we will never hesitate to use it. I thank the Headquarter Integrated Defense staff for affording me the opportunity to speak at this August seminar. Thank you very much.